are we going to see this opportunity, for Sir Keir Starmer to introduce new laws? I mean, it reminds me a bit of, if you can remember, Christopher Hitchens, in a couple of years before his death in America. God, I miss him. I mean, we don't have many more to replace him in the UK. Such an incredibly astute, erudite commentary. He said to the Americans, he said, look, beware. In the UK, we are already seeing words like Islamophobia being used as a tool by the state to quieten people, to suppress people, a big part. And also it enacts itself, this lack of liberty enacts itself in two-tier policing as well, which is another huge polemic issue with the rioting. But Hitchens warned the Americans years ago about how people will be suppressed, how you'd be quietened, how you'd be silenced. This word Islamophobia is going to creep in a lot to the political lexicon, but I think we're already there. We can expect, I think, for the PM to act, and he will act like, as George said, the left are very, very, very authoritarian, and they believe in the force and the power of the police state.
Yeah, as you know, I like to obviously put all the facts in front of our brilliant audience, and obviously separate the facts from the opinion. On the Tommy Robinson.
Why do we need facts at this point? I mean, let's not confuse things.
Never let the truth stand in the way of a good story. And I always say it's all about distraction. How are we going to be distracted?
You and your facts.
I know, it's outrageous, isn't it? Well, lies, damn lies, and statistics. It's got to be good. What do you want? The truth, the whole truth, or nothing but the truth? It sounds like a multiple choice, doesn't it? What the position is Tommy Robinson, he was due in court today, actually, over alleged contempt of court for making his documentary Silence. Have either of you gentlemen seen it?
I haven't seen it, no.
No, so what that basically, it was repeating false claims is what it says about a Syrian refugee. He lost the libel case in 2021 and he was ordered not to repeat those claims. What he did when he was over here not so many days ago at the weekend, the previous weekend, he broadcast this film, this documentary, again making out these so-called false claims. And that was the contempt of court. And that's why there was this warrant for his arrest and so on and so forth. So just putting that into perspective. But this is what they're saying about fanning the flames. And so the two have basically been launched together. And a lot of people are suggesting that this is a distraction. And the question is, a distraction from what? So one of the suggestions is this is an excuse now to basically curtail some of our civil liberties. Look, so the sort of people will turn around and say, look, we told you this was going to happen. Therefore, we've got to introduce things like facial recognition. We might have to introduce curfews for certain people. We're going to throw the full force of the law behind some of these far-right thuggery, as they call it. What's your take on that, George? Is that a fair summary?
I think it is, because I think that this is Keir Starmer's natural mode. I think he wants to introduce a certain police state in the United Kingdom. Now, remember, during the COVID lockdowns, he was even more zealous for lockdowns than the government was. I mean, he was even more of a zealot for vaccines than the government was. That's who Starmer is. And when he rails against the far-right thuggery, that's who he sees as his political opponents. Because I think, he's someone who wants to return to the European Union. He's part of the sort of the Davos way of thinking. And he knows that the British people really are not there, that's just not the way they want to see the world. And he knows, just like Blair knew, that the British people do not want more migrants. He does. That's the way he thinks. So I think that for him, this is an opportunity to introduce a kind of repressiveness that comes naturally to him. Now, the thing with Tommy Robinson, that yes, it was he was violating the court order, but then he was held under the Terrorism Act because he refused to hand over his phone. When he was, they said, and I think if basically they tell you that you're supposed to hand over your phone, and you don't, then they basically can just hold you under the Terrorism Act. I think that they're going to go after Robinson. I think they're going to go after Robinson supporters. I think they're going to go after all kinds of radio stations or internet chat rooms or any kind of websites that they think are instigating any kind of far-right thuggery. So I think that they were always intending to do this, and I think this is the perfect opportunity to do this. The interesting question, I think, is still, what are they going to do about Farage? Because this is an opportunity for Farage to emerge as a kind of leader of the opposition. I don't think he can do it. I don't think he has the will or the intellectual capability, but this could be an opportunity for somebody like an Enoch Powell, but he doesn't have the Enoch Powell stature or intellect, but an Enoch Powell-like figure
Ouch.
who in the 1970s kind of emerged as the unofficial leader of the opposition. So this is an opportunity for Farage, but I don't think he's going to be able to achieve it.
Yeah, well, we're going to watch this Space Cobra meeting happening as we speak. I know they'll be glued to the Muckrakers, as they always are, as we urge and say, look, we know what you're up to. I want to turn our attention to the Middle East. Obviously, there's been a lot of things happening over there, and we tend to, in the media, just focus on one news story whilst other things are murmuring around. According to the Times of Israel, Israel could launch a preemptive strike on Iran if it receives intelligence that Tehran is certain to attack in retaliation for the assassination of Hamas and Hezbollah leaders. This is your baby, if you like, Martin. You've written extensively on this, including on your brilliant blog, which is compulsive reading for absolutely everybody. Fill us in. What's the latest?
Yeah, it's not a blog. It's a news website. But well, the latest. I think that line from the Israelis is we shouldn't read too much into that. That's pretty standard. That's normally what they tell journalists when journalists ask the loaded question. What are you going to do if you get the intel that the missiles are coming in 2 hours? We all ask that question, and that's always the response. I really hope we don't get to this point. We seem to be at a precipice of diplomatic failure, and we're now looking at Israel somehow going rogue on us, somehow working on its own to start a war with Iran and Hezbollah. And it's just such a shame that the desire, the wish, the wet dream of Netanyahu to have this war where he drags the Americans in with him, which is essentially what he's been trying to do ever since the late 80s. I mean, everyone knows that that's his thing. That's his real obsession. It could happen now, and it could happen for all the wrong reasons. It could happen because we don't have leadership in Washington now. And, when we look back on Israel's invasions of Lebanon, in 2006, I was there for Euronews. In 1982, obviously I wasn't. But both of these invasions, they didn't quite, the Israelis didn't quite get the full backing of the Americans to go ahead and do them. And I think maybe this time, if the Iranians strike Israel, I think we might see a very, very fast simultaneous invasion of Lebanon at the same time. I mean, the intentions, it's been leaked quite a bit. The intentions of Netanyahu and his senior military people is to put IDF forces all the way up to the Litani River in the south of Lebanon, that border line which they created themselves when they pulled out of the Lebanese capital in September 1982. When they invaded, they moved back down and took this and kept that bottom chunk, that swathe of land in the south of Lebanon. I think they'll try and do that again. But, there's so much more at stake now. And in the last couple of days, you cited Levantis.me, my news website, which is based in Lebanon. One of my journalists there has wrote a piece yesterday, I think, about the aircraft carriers being sent to the Lebanese coast. This is really, really worrying, Andrew. I mean, this is so worrying. This is exactly what Netanyahu would want. I've stuck my neck out and predicted in an article just a couple of weeks ago that I think his only recourse now is he either gets the retaliation strike from Iran, which for him will be the green light. That would be the carte blanche. No need to look for the Americans. No need for any excuses. That will be the signal the catalyst where we throw the lever, or he himself creates a false flag attack, which I think is possible. I think it's somewhere between possible and likely. And when you put aircraft carriers, perched just off the Mediterranean coast there, then they become targets for false flag attacks. And the possibility of an Iranian-made missile being fired at one of them, or at US soldiers, or even at any low-flying M16s that are buzzing around the area, it's all creates so much tension, and the margin for miscalculation is just becoming bigger and bigger. And I think so. My personal view, and I wrote this a couple of days ago, my personal view is that I didn't think the Iranians would do a massive retaliatory strike, because the Iranians do not want war with Israel. That's very clear. But when we look at the last two cases of 2006 and 1982, where Israel went into Lebanon, both times the political elite said at the time, we had no choice. We were pushed into a corner. The first time by the PLO, and the second time by Hezbollah, and it more or less made the decision automatic. It was automated. My worry is that the situation now that we have with Iran will push the Israeli elites into making that same automatic decision. So we can only hope that Iran won't go ahead with this massive strike. Just a couple of hours ago, there was a whole lot of video footage which was released of Iranian military doing their drills. It looked just colossal. It looked massive. Now whether that's just public relations, or the problem we've got is that when I was talking about Israel and Netanyahu making some of these decisions to go to war based on conditions which are outside of his control, the problem we've got is the Iranians are in the same position. They've got the political situation to consider themselves. They don't want to look weak in front of their own people. These attacks have been carried out on their land, in their country. So Iran has to do something. The only thing we could hope for is that Americans and the European Union countries get together very quickly and try and diffuse this tension somehow and insist on a ceasefire. Now, incredibly, we can call Israel basically a satellite state, a colony, if you like, of America, because it is. It's entirely funded by the Americans. It's incredible to me. It's absolutely incredulous that America doesn't put its foot down and actually insist on a ceasefire. And I think this will be a real test for the Kamala vice presidency for the next 6 months, is that whether she can get the right people into the Situation Room and make this happen, because we are looking at something now between Israel and Iran which is much bigger than ever before of 2006 and 1982.
No, absolutely right. And Biden, absolutely, that's what he wants, part of his legacy. He wants the whole thing tidied up. I did talk about this brilliant news site, and it's more than a blog, although blogs are okay as well. But Levantis.me, do have a look at that sort of stuff as well. We're going to come back with George's reaction to all of that straight after these messages.
Tracking global corruption and threats that undermine our security. This is the Muckrakers on today's News Talk, TNT.
Welcome back to the Muckrakers with me, Andrew Eborn. I'm joined by Dr. George Szamuely and also Martin Jay, who's much more than a blogger. He's a seasoned journalist of 30 years and, shaking his head. How dare I dismiss him as a blogger? I meant no disrespect. It's all good stuff. But some really serious stuff, and I would recommend the site to you. George, what's your take on it?
Well, it's really very interesting that according to the United States, officials, they had no advance warning of either of the assassinations carried out by Israel. But their response of the United States was that, well, if Iran retaliates because of these assassinations, then we are going to protect Israel. Well, that's a very nice deal for Israel. Israel can get to do whatever it wants, kill whomever it desires. And it's always got somebody else coming in and assuming all the risks. Now, this is an absolutely catastrophic decision on the part of the United States. I mean, you're assuming all the risk without having taken any part in the decision-making that led to these risks. and without really even considering how it benefits in any way the interests of the United States. But that's what the situation has been. So, the Biden administration, had it been had any interest in what's good for America, could have said to Israel, "Okay, well, you did the assassination. It's your baby. You take the risk." And good luck with you, but it's up to you now. You've got to face Iran on your own. And instead, United States officials rush there and say, "Oh, we're right behind you. We're going to build this international coalition to support you in case Iran attacks." We get the Jordanians involved. We got the Gulf states involved. They're all part of this coalition to protect you. Not one of these states had any say at all in the original attacks. So that's a very nice deal. Now, I don't know what Iran is going to do. Iran is in a very difficult position because if it does nothing, then obviously it looks weak in the eyes of the region. I mean, it's already looked weak, by the feeble response to the assassination of General Soleimani, the lack of response to the assassinations of the nuclear scientists. Frankly, it looked ridiculous when the Iranian president died in a helicopter crash. Who knows what the truth of that was? And then of course there was that theatrical drone attack on Israel that didn't do any damage in April. So Iran already looks a little feeble. So if it doesn't do anything, then the Americans will say, "Hey, you see how Iran didn't do anything because of our tough, muscular diplomacy. That's what works. Iran respects strength. Because we appeared on the region and Iran backed down right away." So that Iran looks bad. On the other hand, if Iran does another kind of theatrical attack, as in April, again, Iran looks ridiculous. Then the third alternative, Iran launches a serious attack and therefore provokes a war. And again, a war with Israel is very likely to draw in the United States. And that's going to have, Iran really does not want that. So, of course, Netanyahu knew when he ordered this assassination that Iran would be put in a very, very difficult position. So I don't know which way Iran is going to go. It has no good options. But at the same time, Israel also doesn't have any good option because the Lebanon strategy that Martin outlined of going up to the Litani River, I mean, Israel has already tried that. I mean, each time it's done that, it's ended in disaster. There's absolutely no basis for thinking that it's going to be any more successful now. They had to withdraw in 2000 because they were driven out by Hezbollah. They had to withdraw in 2006, again driven out by Hezbollah. Why would they think now, after fighting this war for 10 months against Hamas, they're going to be in any position to be able to do any better? So, that's not a good option either. So, I mean, if I had to hazard a prediction, I just don't think this is going to end in any of these scenarios. I think it's just not in anyone's interest to go and take these risks. But I may well be wrong about that.
Martin?
Well, I think George's analysis is brilliant. I think he's right. There are no win-win scenarios either for Israel nor Iran. And in many ways, I mean, Israel is overstretched now. I mean, militarily speaking, the resources are stretched to the limit. The Americans have given them $18 billion this year alone in military aid. Incredible, absolutely incredible. And George was absolutely right. The Litani River idea, which is a plan on paper at least, is a bit of a fantasy because the Hezbollah of today is not the same Hezbollah of 2006. It's much, much stronger, much bigger and much stronger, more sophisticated weapons, and an even more disciplined army. Still, the worst kept secret in the Middle East, if you live in Lebanon, work in Lebanon, as I did, is that the Israeli infantry isn't up to much. Never was. So if you're going to do the Litani River, you need to do the full bells and whistles invasion of air, special forces, infantry, tanks, and ideally support from Uncle Sam as well. And if Netanyahu is hoping that having some aircraft carriers just positioned off the coast will be enough to intimidate the Iranians. It's a really, really poor call, because it won't be at all. It just makes the situation more desperate. And when it becomes very clear that at the final point, when you get just a hair away from somebody pushing that button, America won't join Israel, when America backs out, then everything collapses. All of Netanyahu's credibility collapses, and he finds overnight he has to resign as a prime minister. This guy needs momentum of killing to stay in power. And it's an interesting link between him and Zelensky in Ukraine. Both of them need war to stay in power. The moment war stops, they've got a different political situation facing them, and probably a calamity in many respects. Look in history. Go back to Reagan. Go back to what happened with Lebanon, and when Reagan sent the aircraft carriers there and started shelling Syrian positions in 1982. A year later in 83, you had 260 US Marines murdered in their barracks by what is now called Hezbollah. And that was enough for Reagan to ship out of Lebanon, to pull out completely. Now, Reagan in 1980s, this is when America was a real superpower. It was the superpower. You can't make a comparison to Kamala Harris and Biden. They don't have the strength, they don't have the clout, they don't have the intellect, they don't even have the military support. If you listen to people like Douglas McGregor, who was a colonel, in the military, was in part of Gulf War, first Gulf War. When you talk to him, when you listen to his interviews about the strength and capability of the American military today, it's really not very impressive at all. His take is American infantry, American soldiers these days, aren't really that good. And so for us to look at a scenario now where America could be drawn into a war against Iran is, I think, very, very unlikely. And I think Netanyahu is in such a tight corner now. He's basically preying on an Iranian retaliation. And if that doesn't come, then, who knows what false flag attacks he might cook up. But I think there's a fourth scenario, which George didn't mention. The fourth scenario, and his three scenarios were absolutely right. The fourth scenario is that if you push Hezbollah hard enough and you push the Iranians hard enough, they may well be tempted to do what they bitterly regret they didn't do in 2006, which is go across the Israeli border and take a slither of land on the northern side of Israel. And that's the big fear for Netanyahu and the IDF, is that have they got the forces? Have they got the numbers? Already they're stretched the limit in Gaza, and Gaza's not working. Gaza is not working. They are not killing Hamas in Gaza. So, quite a collection of nightmare scenarios for Netanyahu, and none of them good if for those looking for peace.
Yeah, again, you make some excellent points. And we talk about Netanyahu, and we always reference the Wag the Dog, the movie in 1997, and say, well, look, war's a distraction. And this is what happens. It makes people forget that as soon as the war finishes, and hopefully it will finish, the spotlight's going to go back on Netanyahu. Remind us, George, about that spotlight. What would he face once war's finished?
Well, once war is finished, the Israelis would realize that he led them to a disaster, and he could well be ousted. Having said that, I do think that one should have a caveat to that. Netanyahu is a very wily customer. He's been written off many times in the past. He has dominated the Israeli politics really pretty much since the mid-90s. So that's about 30 years. So, various figures have temporarily filled the prime minister's position. We had Benny Gantz, we've had Naftali Bennett. They come and go, but Netanyahu is eternal. So, yes, it's quite possible that Netanyahu will be blamed for everything that happened, or everything that led up to October 7th, the way he conducted the war, the hostages, everything, and then there's all the corruption allegation. That would be the end of his career. But in Israel, all sorts of very obnoxious people kind of come back from, they're thrown into shame, and then they return. I mean, Ariel Sharon, there was the obviously the 1982 disastrous invasion, and then to top it off, there was the Sabra and Shatila massacre in September 1982. There was an internal Israeli report about, I think, the Katz report that directly blamed him. He said it was his responsibility. He knew perfectly well what these Phalangist militia were going to do in the camp, the PLO camp, in which they entered. There were only women and children there. He knew it. He facilitated it. It's pretty much bordering on a war crime, since he aided and abetted the massacre of women and children. And you thought, okay, well, that's it. That's the end of Arik Sharon. We're never going to hear from him again. And lo and behold, he came back. Not only did he come back to be prime minister, he also came back to ensure that the Camp David agreement and well, it wasn't really an agreement, but at least the Camp David negotiations in 2000, and then the Taba negotiations in 2001 was sabotaged by his when he stormed into the Al-Aqsa Mosque in 2001. He did that deliberately to sabotage all negotiations, and then he became prime minister. And there it was, and then he fell into a coma. And he just, he continued to live, even in a coma. I can't remember how many years he continued living in a coma. So it would be great to think that Netanyahu will be gone, maybe even in prison, but I wouldn't necessarily put any money on it.
Yeah. Martin, final word for you.
I'd put some money on him fleeing the country. And there are two key countries that he may well seek refuge in. One is United Arab Emirates. Another one is here in Morocco. So those are both countries that would welcome him if he found that it was just untenable to remain in Israel with all these corruption allegations flying around. It's part of it. Part of this whole story is corruption. And it's incredible how, when you look at the history of prime ministers in Israel who have launched invasions into Lebanon and other attacks simply because they run out of political solutions and they need to stay in power another year or whatever, So I think it may well be, this could be, as we are speaking today, right now, we may well experience in the next few hours, even possibly something really quite huge happening in the Middle East between Iran and Israel. And I think George is absolutely right to say you just can't get rid of Netanyahu. He just keeps bouncing back. He's the ultimate political survivor. He is literally like chewing gum that, is stuck to the sole of your shoe and you think you've got rid of it. And then a couple of days later, there it is again, So really, really scary times we're living in, and watch the news very carefully. Literally anything could happen even today.
Yeah, and as you say, incredibly worrying times, both domestically and internationally as well. And we will continue returning to this topic. Gentlemen, you'll be back with me on Wednesday and Friday this week. I'll be joined again tomorrow by more exciting guests. And in the meantime, if you have any areas that you'd like us to unpack here on the Muckrakers, do get in touch. Look via the website. There are all sorts of contact forms. And as we say, we always want to look at the various questions that other media outlets are not looking at. Our quest is to basically uncover the truth, however uncomfortable that truth might be. Thanks again to Martin Jay, the very seasoned journalist and brilliant website, a news website, not a blog, and to Dr. George Szamuely. I'll see you next time. Take care.